Jaseth of Jaelshead Book 1, Bloodkin, by Cathy Ashford. Chapter 25. The next week passed oh so slowly. Stella ignored me completely at the academy and at the hall, and it would have been awkward as hell if I hadn't been totally preoccupied with thoughts of Thayelik. Saturday finally came around, dawning damp and cold. I woke early, without the help of Charlie for once, even though I'd been up late the night before practicing. I didn't want to muck anything up in front of the Queen. After meditating, I bathed carefully, then met the others to walk to the Shivering Thistle. Anna had sent a note during the week requesting that the mentors come with us, so it was a group of 6 that set out through the drizzly morning. When we arrived, Anna had banked the fire and Lux was lying on a couch, looking for all intents and purposes to be fast asleep. She opened one eye as we came in. "The mystery guest's still not here?" "Ugh," she sniffed. On cue, Thayelik in her full disguise entered the lounge. "She is now," she said quietly, and the others spun round to look at her, Telgith letting out a muffled yelp. I expected Lux to challenge the Queen, or at least make some acerbic comment, but either she didn't realise who Thayelik was, or simply didn't care, as she just yawned loudly and levered herself upright. "Well, can we get on with it then? The sooner we start, the sooner I can leave." The lesson was about constructing a shield around something, or someone, to prevent movement. As this was an exercise in defence, not execution, the shield had to be in place to permit the flow of oxygen, while still being solid enough to freeze the target in place. We had to practice on our own hands first, before Anna let us have a go at immobilising our mentors. Thayelik sat quietly in the corner, listening and watching, while Anna explained the technique. When Anna was finished with us, she moved off to speak to the Queen. I tried to keep one ear on what Anna was saying to her, but constructing this shield was hard, especially as I was trying not to suffocate Charlie. I took a break after a while so Lux could have a turn practicing on Charlie, and sat down to watch the Queen and Anna. She was showing Thayelik how to distract someone who was attempting to use Yavin. She had the Queen gesture wildly to try and catch the eye, and make a series of loud noises. Anna had bought a small sack of pebbles and had Thayelik throw them at her as she tried to construct an immobility shield. At lunchtime, the weather had cleared and the sun was beginning to break through the clouds, so we took a break and went around to our usual cafe for sandwiches and coffee and a pipe of white. In the afternoon, under the close supervision of Anna and the mentors, we took it in turns to try and immobilise the Queen, while she used some of the tricks Anna had taught her to try and distract us. Using Yavin on Thayelik made me nervous, and what with her trying to reflect light directly into my eyes using a small mirror Anna had given her, or throwing pebbles at me, I was completely unable to even get close to constructing the shield. By mid-afternoon we were all weary, and none of us had even been able to hold the Queen in place for more than a couple of seconds. Anna seemed satisfied with our progress, however, and finally dismissed us. Outside, Lux made a beeline for the gondola with barely a wave of goodbye. The rest of us walked somewhat more sedately through the quarter, and at the turn-off to the hall, no one seemed to find it unusual when I carried on with Thayelik. At the bridge to the castle where I left her, she paused for a second. "So, will you be joining us again next week?" I asked her hopefully. "Oh, yes, and today was most instructive, but Anna has a few more things she wants to show me." She nibbled her bottom lip for a second. "Jaseth, would you like to come in and have a drink with me? I have no official engagements for the evening and could use the company." Well, I wasn't going to say no to that, so I followed the Queen across the bridge, under the huge gateway and through the courtyard of the castle, feeling the guards on the walls watching me at all times. From the reception area, Thayelik led me up the grand staircase, then through the warren of the castle's living quarters. The thick, ancient stone walls were covered in tapestries for warmth, and the corridors were lit with a combination of candles and globes. We went up 2 more flights of stairs, winding our way through the castle until I figured we were at the back somewhere. Finally, in a corner, Thayalik unlocked a heavy wooden door opening onto a flight of circular stone stairs. It appeared that her private rooms were in one of the towers that faced the lake. At the top of the stairs, she unlocked another door, and we stepped into her living room before she locked the door behind her. "Well, here we are," she said, gesturing around the room. It was a large, square space, with another door that presumably led to her sleeping quarters. It wasn't nearly as opulent as I had expected. A fire had already been lit in the grate in the middle of the far wall, and was surrounded by 2 armchairs and a couch, much like mine and Charlie's room at the hall. A few bright, interesting paintings hung on the wall, interspersed with more thick tapestries to keep out the cold. Narrow windows were set into all the 4 walls, offering views of the lake and back over the castle to the city. At one end of the room was a small dining table, surrounded by 6 dining chairs. The other end had a number of upright chairs and short side tables, arranged in a formal setting. On the other wall, just down from the door we had entered through, was a large desk, neatly stacked with papers. There was a large globe set in a pretty filigree sconce to illuminate Thayalik's work, and a large jar of a dark teal ink. The Queen obviously had to refill her pen frequently with all the writing she did. Thayalik motioned that I was to sit by the fire, and as she opened a small cooler close to the dining table, she began rummaging inside. "Now, I could have someone bring something up from the cellars, but there's 1 or 2 bottles in here for regular consumption." Will this be sufficient, Lord Jaseth?" She smiled playfully as she handed me the bottle to inspect. It was a 587 Jaelshead Chardonnay, and would most certainly be sufficient. Out of all the varieties that we grew in the Jaelshead Valley, Chardonnay was the only one I actively disliked, but nevertheless, I'd heard that 87 was supposed to be a cracker. And if the Queen offers you a drink, you bloody well take it. Thayalik left me with 2 glasses and a corkscrew, and ducked upstairs to quickly wash off her disguise. When she returned, I toasted her health, and we drank a glass of the admittedly fine wine. We talked about nothing in particular, though she was rather interested in Lux, so I ended up telling her the whole story of Joey and Charlie's rescue of the baby Mingle. She looked thoughtful as I told her again about Lux's father's theft of the black moss. When we had finished one glass, I poured another, and Thayalik stood, going over to her desk and retrieving a long, silver-handled pipe and a black velvet bag containing its smaller pouches of moss. "We should go upstairs," she told me, and I gulped, loud enough that I fervently hoped she, with her normal human hearing, didn't notice. The Queen's bedroom was upstairs. Was she inviting me to the balcony? She continued after a brief pause. Oh, hell, did she do that on purpose? Again, I got the distinct impression that Thayalik was amusing herself at my expense. Yeah. Balcony sounds good." Thayalik gathered up her glass and the bottle, leaving me to take up the pipe and the moss as well as my glass. Up the spiral staircase, she led me through the left-hand door, and we were out on the balcony. Before the leaving, the whole top floor of the tower would have been open. The battlements looked straight over the side of the castle to the lake below, and catapults had probably been set up between them to fend off attacks on the castle by water. Now, however, the half of the rooftop that faced the city had been built in to contain the sleeping and bathing quarters of the current monarch. The open part of the roof was where we now stood. Thayalik placed the wine on a small round table and gestured to a brazier beside it, filled with new wood, but unlit. "Jaseth, would you care to light this for me?" I obliged, sparking the bottom of the brazier with Yavin until hungry flames licked the wood. That done, I sat with Thayalik as she packed her pipe with some red moss and handed it to me to light. "You're pretty handy with that," she observed, accepting the smoking pipe. "Yeah, it's pretty good now that I'm not going around setting random things on fire." "Oh?" She raised an amused eyebrow at me, so I told her about the night the Neathi assessors had come to Jaelshead, and I caused the huge fire in the leaf pile. That had been a bitter memory. Just another reminder of my parents' lack of trust in me. But telling Thayalik about it somehow seemed to drain the poison away, and she laughed gaily at me about the foibles of my 16-year-old self. As the spring sun angled around and began its descent over the lake to the west, we drank and enjoyed the red and laughed. I surprised myself with the ease of Thalic's company. It had only been a few months since I had seen her in person for the first time and could barely look her in the eye. At one point I stood and went to inspect the battlements, arranged in block around the waist-high wall that ran the perimeter of the rooftop. From here you couldn't even see the city, just the lake stretching out to the south. We could have been anywhere, the two of us, alone. Thalic came and stood beside me as I ran my hand over the rough old stone. "It's a pretty amazing view you've got here," I told her. "Isn't it?" She smiled ruefully at me, though I get a touch of vertigo when I stand too close to the edge. And she sighed, her mood changing. It's hard to imagine a time when humans needed all this to be safe. She indicated the battlements with a movement of her wineglass. "Yeah, well, apparently we loved our wars," I said, trying to lighten the moment, but she looked at me seriously. There were so many wars. Too many. People doing disgusting, terrible things to each other. And for what? Because there were mad, greedy people in charge, demanding their subjects give their lives to acquire that which did not belong to them. I was a bit disturbed by this turn in the conversation, and used the opportunity to place a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Well, at least we don't have to worry about that anymore." She looked at me, considering. "But do you really think that?" she almost whispered. "What did she mean by that?" "Well, yeah, of course. There hasn't been a war since the leaving." She sighed and turned back to the lake. "Has it occurred to you that there could very well be a war in the making right now?" I laughed, too loudly. Was she serious? Who would we go to war with? Yul? She shook her head. "I don't think so. I think our enemy is within us." Which didn't really make sense. "What? Are you worried about, like, the Mingles and stuff?" She glanced at me quickly, a sad smile on her lips. "Worried? Yeah, that would be one way to put it." She shrugged her shoulders. "I'm sorry. I didn't bring you up here to unburden myself. Shall we have some more red?" I was so pleased with myself, so distracted by the joy of being alone with Thalic that I didn't pay much thought to what she had said. Later on, afterwards, I would look back on what she had told me and wonder if maybe, had I listened to her, would things have worked out differently? Could I have somehow prevented what happened? Stupid, I know, to think that way, but it kept coming back to haunt me. The contents of a conversation with the beautiful queen, held as the sun went down one particular spring day. End of the chapter, and end of part 3. Oh yeah, there we go.